an interesting Torah portion this week. It's pretty amazing that every Torah portion seems to be interesting in its own way. So we are in Parshat Shoftim, making our way through Deuteronomy. So this is, of course, as Moses, so all the Israelites have made it to, they are across the River Jordan, across from the land of Israel. They've made it through the wilderness. They're about to go into the promised land. Moses knows that he's not going to be able to go in. So he is giving this big speech saying to everyone, okay, when you go in, remember, this is a special land and there are special rules that you all need to follow. So it's a lot of it is sort of rehashing the laws and ways that society is going to be set up once they get into the land of Israel, because they are, as the Jewish people in the promised land, there's certain ways that they are meant to go about things. So Shoftim is talking about some more sort of like legal nitty-gritty types of things. It doesn't necessarily jump off the page as being, the most exciting section that we're in, but I think there's some really, really important elements for us to pick up on. So I just wanted to start first with, because a lot of this is talking about how the courts are set up, how the judges are set up, all sorts of things like that. So the question I want to start with for y'all to answer is, what is the importance of a well-run legal system, justice system in a functioning society? What's the importance of it? Rebecca?
Well, that it be fair and just, and that everybody knows what the procedures are.
So fair and just, but also like clear and transparent, right? It's not secretive. It's all out in the open. Everyone knows how it's supposed to go, and so there's nothing that gets hidden. Got it. Merle, you had your hand raised. Also, I see in the chat.
I was going to say the same thing, basically, just to keep things appropriate.
Keep things appropriate. So what does that mean?
Fair, square. Mm-hmm. People know people know what it's all about, what they're supposed to do, how they can do it.
Right. And I think also fairness, right? That's something that we've talked about, that all kinds of people get the same treatment in the system, no matter what. Okay. Douglas, you got something on it?
Well, I can't imagine a society that doesn't have rules. It would be just chaos. And I don't think, the thousands of Jews were all on board, particularly when Moses was dead, that say, okay. So it's you got to have the rules, or the society won't function.
Right. You have to have the rules. And I think, and then also like the justice system is also to make sure that the rules are enforced, right? Because if you're going to have rules, the next question is, okay, well, what happens when you break the rules? And if we don't have that, then why would anybody? As you said, right? All of these Jews, there are probably a couple troublemakers around there. Okay, great. Cindy?
Yeah, I was pretty much going to say what you just said, that it's so that people know the expectations and the consequences.
Mm-hmm. Right. Expectations and consequences. Very important. Ben, you want to add something?
Thank you, Rabbi. I think it also supports generating wealth so that I can have property, it can be defined, it can be supported by the courts or other accumulation of prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Great. So things don't get in the way, right? Like all the other elements of society can keep running. Got it. Great. Brad?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, this is the passage that repeats the saying, justice, justice, pursue justice. And the idea of it being a pursuit is important to me. It's always something that's always a bit out of reach, to really arrive at justice. So it's something it's a process. It's
Right.
not just a given.
Great. That's a great point, right? It's not something that just magically happens and we all agree to it and every time, right? It's something that's constantly we keep working at it, we keep improving it and making sure we're on track. Great. So here's the other question I want us to think about too. So these are all right, like what are the elements, what are the important elements in a well-functioning justice system? When there is a well-functioning system, how do you think that, like, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. How does that help members of the society relate to each other, right? And work together? And if there is a not well-functioning justice system, there are no consequences, there is no fairness for everyone. How might that impact how citizens, the relationships and interactions there? Rebecca?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind as you were talking was corruption. I mean, how do you keep corruption out of a system that's supposed to be fair and just, or how even do you keep that that thought from not crossing your mind if you don't get the justice that you thought that you were going to get during the proceedings?
Right. And right, that's a great point. Like, how do you, it probably diminishes maybe trust, right? And if you don't think like, oh, like, well, we're all going to be held accountable, but if you see someone being treated differently than you are, doesn't really create a lot of trust there. Merle?
I think too that if you have people that get it on one side and people that don't get it on the other side, you could end up in a war of some kind. It might be verbal, it might be physical, we don't know, but those are the things that can happen if people don't agree with each other.
Right. Sort of like, I think there's building tensions that come when there's not, when justice isn't equally carried out, right? And that builds, and maybe it leads to, disagreements and issues, and it could escalate. But when there's not this feeling that there is accountability, that there is justice, you tend to, things either build up or you want to take it into your own hands. Great. Jonathan?
So there's the idea that kindness is contagious, or that what works will expand. What's functional, what a few people talked about functionality, and one spoke of as generating wealth. So, for example, you have the justice system of America the common law system is based on the common law system of Britain, and the Americans said it works, let's do it. The common law system of Britain is based on the Old Testament portion of the Christian Bible, where Deuteronomy says, make diligent inquiries and make sure all rulings are consistent with prior rulings and so on. And then, you have the Christian Bible is, of course, their portion of the Torah of the Jews, who are the menorah of the world and the light of the world. So it's very testimonial and very contagious. So, I would say, that's what I would see in terms of, I guess, the purpose of having a good justice system. And so we have, the Torah is the origin of law in the Western world, and kind of sort of in the world. That's kind of what I see on that. Yeah.
Great. And I think, and that sort of goes back to something that Brad was saying about like justice being something that you pursue, right? That it's something that's constantly, you work towards it. It's ideally, right? We all play a role in bringing justice into the world, whether that's through the legal system or all that. And we're going to see as well, we're going to look at some of the laws from Deuteronomy that sort of begin to set up some of the court systems. And then actually we're gonna look at some of the Mishnah as well, because in the Mishnah and the Talmud, we get sort of a filling out of the legal proceedings for how things for procedure and in terms of judges, in terms of witnesses, in terms of evidence and testimony. So we hear sort of what are the laws that govern that. Great. So what I want to, we're going to look at the text in just a minute. But I think the questions that I kind of want us to have in the back of our mind is, as we look at how these courts and how these systems are being set up, what are like the underlying values, right? Because as we were saying, right, like there's more than just like, oh, like we'll just make a court, and if people have an issue, they can go and take it there, right? That this is all about creating a society where there are rules, where there is order, where there is accountability, and where there is justice, so that there is not chaos and tension and violence and discord, right? So we're going to look at how do these, like, what are the underlying values? What do the systems seem to be focused on? And how does it create a functioning society, basically? All righty. So here, I'm going to share my screen. Looks a little small. Let me see. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. All right. Can you all see that okay? All right, great. So this is from, these are a couple.
Yeah, I do have a question before you
Yes.
start, because we're going to be talking here about human justice, but there's also divine justice, is there not? And what is the relationship between the two?
It's a great question, right? Absolutely, that there is human justice that happens in this world and in this time, and there's divine justice that is some form does not come from human beings, right? Is sort of the ultimate judge of truth. And there's this understanding within Judaism and the Jewish legal tradition that human justice is imperfect because we are human beings and we, are fallible and we make mistakes, versus God's justice, which is, perfect, but we can't fully understand God's justice, and there's no way that we can fully carry out God's justice in the world. So we do our best. And so many of the layers that you'll also see baked into it is sort of how do we account for human error in the pursuit of justice? Because because also, as Jews will say, that it's not, everything isn't all about what happens after you die. What happens in this world, in this life, is incredibly important. And so it's important that us here and now, we do our best to create the human justice that we can. Great question, though. But the divine justice, we have High Holy Days coming up soon, so we have our opportunities to encounter that shortly. All right, great. Would someone like to read this first section for us? Merle, go ahead.
You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes and all the settlements that your God Adonai is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall not show partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God Adonai is giving you.
All right, great. So we'll pause just for a second. So this is talking about setting up judges, right? So we'll remember we saw some of this earlier in the Torah, back in Exodus, that originally Moses was the only decider, and everyone came with their issues to Moses, and he couldn't, that's too much for one person to handle. So he set up series of courts, right? Of having layers of lower courts and then higher courts. And then ultimately, like, Moses is sort of the supreme court that it comes to at the end. So again, this is talking about setting up judges for each of your tribes, right? Each of the tribes of Israel. So this is the system of judges sort of throughout the land. So what are the values? What are the important elements that they're bringing up here? Ben?
Thank you, Rabbi. The one that jumps out to me is bribery. And it's interesting that from my perspective here, the Torah, this is 5,000 plus years old. or so, approximately.
Mhm.
And here, this human behavior of bribery is front and center. And today, 2024, we see it again and again and again, bribery. So to me, what jumps out is one, the consistency of the human behavior, and then calling it out, because it must have been important back then to give it all this ink here in the Torah, and even today. So wow, it's kind of mind blowing that something, I don't know, say bad, but something bad never went away. I don't know, just kind of a whatever.
Exactly, right. And I think, and that's a great thing to point out that, whenever you see, anything in the Torah and the Talmud, anything that they're discussing a particular issue, it's usually because it's an issue that they've seen that needs to be addressed. And uh, uh, sorry, right. And this is clearly an ongoing concern, right? First, you're setting up a system of justice. You're setting up the courts. One of your first concerns is bribery, because inevitably human nature carries over, and people will want to get out of the consequences. People want to get out from being responsible for what they've done, and you have to make sure that if it's going to be well run, if it's going to do its job, it can't be doing that. Right. What else do we notice? Susan?
Yes, I certainly agree with Benjamin about the bribery, because it's even subtle things, and certainly we're dealing with it today in our own society quite a lot. And that's generally one of the downfalls of our I was going to say civil servants, of our leaders. I mean, even trips, like the Supreme Court justices, and even little things are still bribes in a way, or could be influenced. Okay, so the other thing I say, it comes up that you should not favor the poor over the rich. You should show impartiality. And that goes somewhat against another commandment to treat the widow, the orphan, and the stranger.
Well, hold on. Where are you seeing that?
But it comes up later. You should not show partiality to the wealthy over the poor. When you're judging, you should judge fairly.
Exactly, right. That everyone is judged equally.
Treated in judgment.
Right.
And I'm saying there's a little bit of a tension with that, with we're supposed to favor the poor, help the poor, help the indigent and all that. But in judgment, you're not supposed to, in justice, you're supposed to deal with the issue, not whether the person is poor or rich.
Exactly, right. It comes down to what are the actions and how is everyone held accountable and this kind of behavior. Now we see other ways of people being, taken care of differently, right? Like when it talks about, tzedakah, right? Giving to charity, that it says, look after these vulnerable communities. And here it says everyone should be treated fairly, right? And we might assume you shall not take bribes, right? There are certain people who are able to give bribes, and there are certain people who are not. So you would think that's also what they're trying to address as well, as economic disparity there.
It says it later about that, I think, because yes, you want to put it with monetary or bribes. Yes, that does as well. But on the other hand, the contradistinction is that just because a person is poor doesn't mean that person should be treated differentially. You should judge on the issue. So.
Exactly, right. Everything is judged equally. That's the goal here. Right. Anything else that people are noticing that what seems to be like the important elements so far to a justice system?
That you thrive, that you're able to thrive within the system.
Exactly. And that kind of goes back to something that Benjamin had said, right? Of that when you have these things set up, then you can thrive and then you can, live in the land and deal with the other, make sure that you're farming and you're dealing with all the things that need to get dealt with. You're not consumed by all of this other stuff, right? It sets you up to thrive in the other areas of your life. Great. Brad?
Yeah, it's interesting. Who is the you in 19? Because in 18, it's the you shall appoint the magistrates. But is that the same you in 19, or is 19 directed particularly at the magistrates, or is it to all the people? Is this does this apply to each one of us, not just the magistrates?
That's a good question. So in this case, right? So this is talking to everyone at large, but anyone is capable of being a judge. It's not like there's only a particular set aside group of people, especially the way that rabbinic courts get constructed later on. That like who can be a judge is a very wide range of people. But I think it's meant to be taken in general that like if you are judging, if you are involved in this process, you can't judge unfairly. You have to be impartial. But it is talking in particular about a legal system, and not just in general of like don't judge people unfairly. Now, of course, that's important as well, but here it's talking more specifically about the system. All right, great. Let's jump down to the next text. So of course there's a difference between criminal law and civil law. And so civil law being in this, and as laid out here, and the rabbis will go into a lot of detail about it as well. Civil law are the things that you pay a fine for, or you're held accountable in that kind of way of, like you left, you didn't properly repair your fence and your cow broke out and smashed all my tomatoes. So now you need to pay me for the loss of my tomatoes, right? Something like that. Or you were negligent with something and I fell down and broke my leg. And now you need to pay for my medical treatment and, the cost of my disability, basically. So there are those type of civil cases, and then there are capital crimes that are the penalty is death, essentially, and so those are only a small number of things. So that is murder, that is idolatry, and it is also sort of like turning against the community, like betrayal of the community. Those are the reasons that you would be put to death. So there are different laws, there's different legal systems for what does it take to convict someone of a civil crime versus a capital crime. Make sense? Kind of. Okay. So these are sort of going into what does it take to convict someone of a capital crime. Rebecca, do you want to read? I think you had your hand up before.
A person shall be put to death only on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. No one shall be put to death on the testimony of a single witness. Let the hands of the witnesses be the first to put the condemned to death, followed by the hands of the rest of the people. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that your God Adonai will have chosen, and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time, and present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from that place Adonai chose, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left. Should the party to the dispute act presumptuously and disregard the priest charged with serving you, there your God Adonai, or the magistrate, that party shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid and will not act presumptuously again.
All right, we got a lot going on here. We'll break it down a little bit. Okay, so what about this first part? What is, so right, it says, a person shall not be put to death on the testimony of two, shall only be put to death the testimony of two or three, not just a single witness. Let the hands of the witness be the first. What is this talking about? Cindy.
Well, that first of all, that if it's just one person saying somebody did something, they could just have a spat with them about something else and just want to lie and do something. But what I'm thinking about is now we deal with a lot of evidence, circumstantial. I mean, with this, if you want to murder someone, you just have to do it when nobody would see you. And as long as no one sees you, there might not be a consequence because 2 or 3 people have to witness you do it.
Right, exactly. So remember, so this is a time when there's not forensic evidence, right? No one is getting the DNA or, using the black light to see the blood spots on the kitchen knife, whatever, right? So the only thing that people could rely on was eyewitness testimony, right? Or potentially like if someone confessed, right? Those were really the only forms of evidence that were trustworthy. And you raise a good point, Cindy, that like when there is just one person, it could be that someone just has an issue, right? And they want to get the person in trouble. Now it could be that the person genuinely saw something and was truthfully testifying. But part of what they're trying to get rid of is any kind of doubt. If there's any doubt that this thing happened, then they will not be held. They will not be put to death. Benjamin?
Thank you, Rabbi. I just have a question. It notes not one, but 2 or 3 witnesses. And then in our discussions, we were talking about eyewitnesses to see it happen. And certainly we know through study that eyewitness accounts are typically very unreliable because people see things so differently. So do you think there's a possibility here that when it says witnesses, people that testify, well, I saw the 2 of them walk into that building, and then the one walked out with bloody hands, and the one inside, I went in, he was stabbed to death, and there was a bloody knife. So that person did not eyewitness the crime, but he's a witness to other aspects of evidence or truth.
Right. So that's a great point. So that issue again, right? That's what's that kind of evidence called in circumstantial, right? Now that's pretty strong circumstantial evidence. But for the most part, eyewitness means you had to see the thing done. It's not right. I saw Bob smack Jim in the head with a shovel and then Jim died, right? It's not that you saw something sketchy. Now it's still probably worthwhile to like share that testimony, but that doesn't mean that the person would be convicted on it. But that's also a great point as well, that we know that people don't always see what they think they saw. So again, the importance of having multiple witnesses gives more opportunity to get it right. And someone I forget who raised, I think maybe Brad raised the question of divine versus human justice, right? So already they're kind of building in, how do we have these sort of safety nets for human error, for mistakes, for people not fully knowing what they saw, right? They still need to build in those safety nets for that. Someone had a hand raised, I think, but I don't see it now. Rebecca?
Well, I think the only thing I can think to add is that there's always going to be inherent biases.
Mm.
Any testimony. You know, it could be about the color purple, where one person says, well, you know, I have a bias towards blue, which makes up the color purple, right? And the other one says, well, I have a bias towards the color yellow.
Right. So I think so trying to fix, so again, having multiple people see something is more likely to get the outcome right. Right?
Which then that makes the color green, not purple, sorry.
That's okay. All right, so then we have the part where it says, in terms of the issues of judgment, that says if a case is too baffling for you to decide, right? If a lower level judge can't figure it out, then you go to the priest or you go to the higher level judge, and you present the problem, and then they will give you the verdict, and then you shall immediately carry out the verdict, observing it scrupulously in all ways. And if you deviate from the direction, you shall be put to death. All right, Brad?
Well, I'm thinking of the daughters of Zelophehad, who went to the magistrates. The magistrates could not decide. They went then to Moses, who threw up his hands and pushed it off to God as the ultimate decider. But here, there's no role for God. It's the Levitical priests who are the ultimate deciders in a dispute. So it's interesting that role of God seems to be absent here.
Right. So that's a great point. So the key reason why the daughters of Zelophehad issue went all the way to God was because it wasn't an issue of trying to resolve a conflict. It was an issue of the daughters saying, we want this law to be changed, right? We don't believe this law is just, and we are going to petition God, because once law is right, once Torah, once all the laws were given to the people, right? No one can change that law. It is God's law. So only God can change it. And in this case, right, God said, you're right, like they are right, they are just in this case, and we will now change the law. So now we're at a point where, now that once you go into the land of Israel, there's no, there's no amendments, there's nothing new. These are the laws that you have. And now it's for you to figure out how to apply it and how to make sure that you're living in a just society. But there's no more taking it to God to have them changed. It's now for you to carry out the justice in your society. But you're right, it's at a point where God is no longer included as someone who could make a change at this point. It's sort of like, it's there, this is the way that we are living life, and we're moving forward with it. So my next question is, right, once you're given the instructions and you don't deviate from the verdict that was announced, you can't make it more harsh, you can't make it more lenient. Should any party act presumptuously and disregard, right, say like, oh, like this isn't important for us to actually do, I'm just going to do what I want to do, this person shall be put to death, and you are sweeping Israel out of the midst. Sorry, you're sweeping evil out of the midst of Israel. So what's this all talking about? Why is this included, do we think? Susan? You're muted.
The word presumptuously, meaning why is it still there? Okay, I'm not following what your decision is. So I think that person, should be punished for that, because they're not following the law. However, today we have a built-in system where you can appeal the verdict. So that I think takes care of some of the presumptuousness, you don't have to follow the verdict immediately, you have a right to appeal it. But interestingly, I don't see it here.
So it's interesting you raise that. So this is actually in the case of an appeal, right? It says, if you can't decide, if you can't figure out what the just thing is, or people can, like, there is the ability, that's why you have the court system, so you can appeal it. So this is essentially saying if you've taken it to the Supreme Court,
Okay.
you've taken it to the highest level, and this is what they say, right?
Yeah, and then that person should be punished, but interestingly, that person should be put to death. Doesn't that what say you?
Yeah, exactly. That party shall die, and you will sweep out evil from Israel. Right? That's a little, it might be a little extreme. It might be a little harsh, right? It's saying people who refuse to abide by the justice that was given, they are evil, and they should not be, it is good for them to be out of here. What do you all think? Does that seem harsh? Does that seem appropriate? Does it make sense? What do we think, Rebecca?
Well, isn't that the death penalty?
Well, so in this case, this is someone who, like, there's been a ruling, and like the ruling says that I owe you 50 shekels because of something. And I say, I think 40 is enough. I'm just going to give 40. I then am put to death. I didn't commit the original crime. Like, it wasn't, the original crime wasn't a capital crime, but the fact that I blew off the ruling and
but it applies directly to what happened in Georgia, because what was the father doing giving a gun to his 14-year-old son?
So in that case, right? So in a case of willful negligence, right? Who's ultimately responsible for what happens? Yeah, absolutely. So I want to jump to this last text that actually comes from the Mishnah. So this is from Mishnah Sanhedrin. So this is the Mishnah is early, like the earliest rabbinic texts. So around between 1st century BCE to 2nd century CE is when these texts sort of came about. And the Talmud is then a commentary on the Mishnah. But this is sort of taking the oral law and writing it down, codifying it, and saying sort of this is how we go about doing certain things. Sanhedrin is talking about the court system. And this particular part that I want us to look at is how the court, so you have a 3-person court set up. And when people come in to give testimony, the judges basically give a speech to the witnesses to give them their instructions. We see this now if you've been on jury duty or you've seen, any kind of like courtroom drama, right? You sort of get instructions from the judge, either as a jury or as a witness about what you can say, what you can talk about. And this is a very interesting speech that witnesses in a capital crime. So you're coming to give testimony about basically in a murder case, the outcome of which is a death sentence. This is the speech that the judge gives to the witnesses. Okay, so here we go. How do the judges intimidate the witnesses giving testimony for cases of capital law? Intimidate of like kind of intimidate. How do they set them up to come and give testimony? They would bring the witnesses in and intimidate them by saying, perhaps what you say in your testimony is based on conjecture, or perhaps it's based on a rumor. Perhaps it is testimony based on hearsay. You heard a witness in a different court say this, or perhaps it is based on the statement of a trusted person. Someone told you this happened and you're just repeating it. Perhaps you do not know that ultimately we examine you with inquiry and interrogation, and if you are lying, your lie will be discovered. The court tells them, you should know that cases of capital law are not like cases of monetary law. In cases of monetary law, a person who testifies falsely, causing money to be given to the wrong party, and then give the money to the proper owner, and his sin is atoned for. But in the case of capital law, if one testifies falsely, the blood of the accused and the blood of his offspring that he did not merit to produce are ascribed to the witness's testimony until eternity. Right? And these are just the witnesses. The proof of this comes from Cain and Abel, that we hear that your brother's blood cries out from us, cries out from the ground. The court tells the witnesses, therefore, Adam, the first human, was created alone to teach that, with regard to anyone who destroys one soul from the Jewish people, the verses ascribe him blame as if he destroyed an entire world, as Adam was one person from whom the population of an entire world came forth. And conversely, anyone who sustains one soul from the Jewish people, the verse ascribes him credit as if he sustained an entire world. And this is done due to the importance of maintaining peace among people, right? This is basically to say that everyone is the same. Your father is not greater than anybody else's father, right? We all come from Adam. And this also serves to tell the greatness of the Holy One, blessed be he, as when a person stamps several coins with one seal, they are all similar to each other. But the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be God, stamped all people with the same seal of Adam, the first human, and not one of them is similar to another. Therefore, each and every person is obligated to say, the world was created for me. The court says to the witnesses, and perhaps you will say, right, so first you get this whole big speech. Here is what's at stake for what is going to happen here. So then you might say to yourself, why would we make this trouble? Perhaps it would be better not to testify at all. But be aware, as it is not as is it not already stated, and he being a witness, whether he has seen or known, if he does not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. All right, so a lot going on here. So what is being stated? What is in this speech that the judges give to the witnesses who are coming in to testify? What are they saying to them? What are they letting them know?
Well, one, it's pretty, it's crucial. It's pretty important. Don't forget the importance of this.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a monetary issue, because that can be resolved by payment of the there was a bug there, of the aggrieved, but it's a life, and then it goes into the stamping of the coins, and then every soul is different, and if one person dies, it's like the whole world, you've killed the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then it will, or the eternity thing, that a false witness can damage the descendants of that person who was killed, and you'll be responsible for eternity. I mean, it has a lot of things in there. I like the first part that it said, it's not going to be intimidation, conjecture, hearsay, what you hear. So it's got to be truthful and what you witnessed. So I think it has a lot in there.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. Right. It starts with the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
That's correct.
So help you God.
Help you God. And then also not intimidation, or what you heard, that could be part of the truth. You heard it from a number of people, but it's really, it's laying out the seriousness of the issue and of all the ways one could deviate from that.
Exactly. Right. And this isn't a case of monetary, right? If you screw up judgment for a monetary case, we can always just give the money to the right person. But if you screw up a capital crime, there's no going back, because if someone is convicted, they're put to death, and we can't go back on that. So let's take it real seriously. Why do you think, and then there's a really interesting part, right, of if you get this wrong, the blood of the offspring will be on you. And every human being is like an entire world. Why do we think that why is this part of what the judges are telling the witnesses to keep in mind in this case?
Well, it's also the seriousness of false testimony and the consequences. Here we're dealing with consequences again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Why else? Why might it be important? Or what are they trying to communicate?
You're destroying a soul, a neshama, and all of the descendants of that neshama. It perpetuates and grows. It's not just that one person. It's a whole I was gonna say generation. It's more than a generations, and then there's guilt too. That you might sustain from the fact that you discredited here an entire world or destroyed an entire world.
Great.
And then it goes down there later, equality. My father is greater than your father.
Right. All human beings are equal. Great.
So it has a lot of issues there in this one caveat that they're pushing for.
Exactly. Merle, you wanted to add something?
Well, one destroying, or whatever you want to call it, one person can destroy a whole community, depending on who it is. But also, if you're a witness and you lie, one would hope that you would feel guilty.
Mm.
And I mean, in today's world, 9 years ago, I was in a really horrible accident, and the two witnesses lied. They told two different stories. So basically, the police said to the one that he felt was lying, "You're going to have to live with this." And unfortunately, if you have witnesses and there's an equal number of witnesses and they don't agree, the police will say, "Well, we're not writing this up at all." And in our case, we were very lucky that the person who caused the accident spoke up and admitted her wrongdoing, and then our insurance took over. But there's a lot of pieces of this that continue into today's world and how laws are written or assumed are written. And that's why I'm thinking one person being destroyed or killed or whatever the crime is can cause a whole community to hopefully look at what their laws are and fix them.
Right. I mean, this is to take seriously, first off, truth, right? Be honesty and not lying, and all of that. But then the other part is also like the value of human life, the value of humanity. And I think it's interesting too, right? Because this is a case of this is a capital crime. It's assumed that this is a murder case, a murder trial, and the outcome is death. And even if the person who is on trial is there for the most heinous act, the witnesses are still reminded this is a human being. So if what you say is true and we put them to death, it better be because what you said was right, because you are responsible for the loss of a human life. And that might be an act of justice, or it might be a terrible sin. So think real good about what it is you're about to say. And I think there's even in the case of that this is a great example of the value on human life from a Jewish perspective, right? That we don't take this lightly. Loss of life, no matter what, is serious and important. And we don't just say like, oh, like it's probably close enough. We want to make sure that we are sure. And later on in later Jewish traditions, right, in Talmud and all this, you basically have so many layers that are added to what is required in order to put someone to death for a capital crime, that it basically becomes obsolete. You've basically legislated it out of existence because there are almost no times when, like, X number of witnesses saw exactly this in this exact moment, and are going to come and testify. So basically, it's still on the books as a possibility, but there's no actual way in reality that capital punishment can be made, which is interesting. So what else do we?
Yes, I've heard that before too, that there were, in fact, there was a statement of, if someone was one person was put to death in 70 years, then that's
yes, exactly.
an executing court. It was something like that. But then the interesting now, how does this resolve with earlier parts of the Bible where where Adonai says you shall stone this person to death? Or the community. There are several instances where, you know, I get it for the disobedience, obnoxious son, that the community stoned them to death. But there's the woodcutter who profanes the Sabbath, and then adulterous couples. That's their earlier than Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy now sets up this court, which in some respects is antithetical to the commandment to stone the woodcutter, the obnoxious child, and the adulterous couple.
So what you were naming is a classic rabbinic workaround, right? Okay. That something is a mitzvah, something is Torah law, it cannot be changed, but what does it mean? Like, we have to have evidence. It says you have to this. What does it mean for it to be evidence? What counts as testimony? What about, right? Like, you add so many layers to it. And in a way, it seems silly, but there are actually certain times when it becomes, so you take, right, the instance of the rebellious and stubborn son, that basically if there is a child who is rebellious and lashes out at his parents and curses his parents, you are obligated to stone them to death. Now, in reality, we can probably I'm sure we can all think of times when we have said not very nice things to our parents and have acted in rebellious and stubborn ways, or times that our children have acted that way towards us. But of course, we can't go about stoning children left and right. So there is a sort of scaffolding, a legal scaffolding that makes it so it is not possible that it makes the crime so narrow. It is basically not possible that it will ever come about. And so there's this grappling with, you're trying you can't change the things that are on the books because this is law from God, but we also need to figure out a way to make it more realistic. And that's the maneuvering that happens there. Brad, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I hope my memory isn't failing me here, but I think this passage ends by saying that despite all of these burdens that are placed upon the witness cannot remain silent. The witness must speak up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right. So we see right here, perhaps you would say, why would I want this trouble? Perhaps it would be better not to testify at all. But be aware that it's stated, he being a witness, whether he has seen or known, if he does not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. Exactly, right? You can't say this is too much trouble, right? Even if it is scary, even if it is hard, if you saw something, you have to give your testimony and you have to speak honestly, right? In this case, silence is as much of a, as much of a lie as an actual lie.
There's also the further in the Talmud too, that he who stands by when there's iniquity is part of the problem, him or herself. So I mean, I think that corresponds with not testifying. Why do I want the trouble?
Exactly, right. And I think that so that section from the Mishnah, this is one of my favorite pieces of text. Because I think it really beautifully explains that just the value of humanity, the value of justice. Justice isn't just about like, okay, we'll hold, like, yes, it's about holding people accountable and all of that, but it's also about upholding human dignity. And it's about upholding the ties across the community, that we can trust in justice, we can trust in each other's honesty, and we can trust that people will be there for each other to speak the truth when it matters most. And if we don't have those things in society, it makes it a whole lot harder to get along, to work together, to do all of the things that a well-running community should be able to do. And I think that's one of it. It can seem like sort of nitty-gritty legalism, but I think underlying it is this real emphasis on humanity and human dignity. And that's what Judaism ultimately comes back to at the end of the day, time and time again. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you for going along with this. I hope this maybe wasn't the hottest topic there ever was, but I appreciate you going for the ride. But wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and have a wonderful weekend, and stay cool wherever you are.
You too. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
This was wonderful.
Shabbat shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom,
Shabbat
everyone.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Shalom.
Thank you.